Welcome to the Playing Books podcast. Imagine this scene. It's the year 2011. Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California, is face down in the mud.
Just completely at rock bottom.
Literally. I mean,
Oh.
he has just left office amidst this massive global financial crisis. His approval ratings have just plummeted to basically nothing. And, well, far worse, he blew up his own family.
Right. It's honestly a really jarring image to even conceptualize because, when we think of that specific name, we default to the indestructible cyborg from the future.
Oh, yeah. Or the larger-than-life leading man with the billion-dollar box office.
Exactly. Or even the incredibly confident cigar-smoking politician.
Yeah.
They absolutely do not picture a man sitting in a dark, quiet house just sort of surveying the total wreckage of his own personal and public life.
It's crazy to think about.
It really is. He was facing a moment where he had to genuinely ask himself if it was even worth the excruciating psychological effort to clean himself up. Like, does he start the slow, humiliating climb out or just succumb to the gravity of his failures and disappear?
And that profound moment, that total collapse, is exactly the focus of this podcast. Because today, we are exploring this book, Be Useful, by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's such a fascinating read.
It really is. And the mission for our episode today is to thoroughly examine the entire book. We want to extract every profound story, surprising quote, and practical lesson to help you, the listener, navigate your own life's challenges.
Because we're looking at a man who literally had to rebuild himself from the mud up.
Right. And the genesis of this book is actually quite telling, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If we fast forward a bit from the wreckage of 2011 to the year 2020, we enter an entirely different kind of global crisis.
Yeah, the lockdowns.
Right. During the lockdowns and the isolation, researchers began noticing this terrifying, quantifiable trend. Depression among U.S. adults had tripled.
And tripled.
Yes, tripled. Negativity, pessimism, and this kind of paralyzing self-pity became a literal epidemic. And in the midst of this overwhelming cultural darkness, something really unexpected happened. People started approaching Arnold for advice.
Wait, really? Because in 2020, he's primarily known as like an elder statesman of action movies. They were treating him like a therapist.
They were treating him as a self-help figure, yeah. People were reaching out through social media, sending letters, walking up to him in public, just looking for some kind of anchor.
That's wild.
And he realized that when he was offering them reassurance, when he was giving them advice to get out of bed, to find a purpose, to keep moving forward, he wasn't just making things up on the fly to make them feel better.
He had a system.
Exactly. He realized he was pulling from a very specific, battle-tested toolkit he'd developed over 60 years. A toolkit forged from absolute highest-level success and lowest-level failure.
And it all stems from his father, right?
It does. It's anchored by a philosophy that predates all of his fame. It was the single greatest piece of advice his father ever gave him, which was simply, be useful, Arnold.
So, to you listening right now, this episode is not a celebrity memoir review. We aren't here for Hollywood gossip or 1980s nostalgia.
Definitely not.
This is a practical, suspenseful journey into building a resilient, highly effective existence. We're going to walk through the philosophy he lays out in this book, Be Useful, by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we're starting with the absolute foundation.
Tool number one, having a crystal clear vision.
Right, because the book makes a really bold, frankly depressing claim right out of the gate. So many of our best people are completely lost.
Also lost.
People hate their jobs, they feel disconnected, and they feel like life just passively happens to them.
And he argues that this pervasive sense of apathy, it doesn't come from a lack of intelligence or a lack of opportunity. He says it comes from a complete lack of vision.
But his advice on how to build that vision is super counterintuitive.
It really is. When we talk about goal setting today, people usually say you need to be hyper-specific immediately. But Arnold says the opposite. He says you must start broad and then zoom in.
Like, how broad are we talking?
Well, his first vision wasn't, I will be a 7-time Mr. Olympia and a Hollywood millionaire. His first vision as a boy in post-war Austria was just one single blurry word.
America?
Yes, America.
But he didn't even know what he would do there.
Not at all. He was a 10-year-old kid living in a house without indoor plumbing. But he would go to the movie house and see these 1950s newsreel.
Oh, right, with the big cars.
Yeah, he saw images of the Golden Gate Bridge, massive Cadillacs with huge tail fins, the Chrysler Building, palm trees in California. It was a broad, almost fuzzy, atmospheric picture.
But psychologically, starting broad is an essential first step, isn't it?
It is. When you are young or when you're just starting a massive life transition, you have these pure obsessions before society's judgments and practicalities cloud them.
Right, before the world tells you, you can't make a living doing that.
Exactly. Look at the psychology of prodigies. Think about Tiger Woods. He was showing off his golf putting skills on national television at age 2.
Age 2, that's insane.
Or Steven Spielberg getting an 8mm camera at age 12 and taking it on Boy Scout trips to film his friends. Their initial visions weren't about wearing the green jacket at the Masters or holding an Oscar.
They just like the thing itself.
Right. Their visions were just the broad environment of golf and movie making. The broad vision gives you a general direction to start walking.
I love thinking about this like a Google Maps interface.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like when you first open the app to look at the world, you start by looking at the whole globe. You see the continents. That's your broad vision. America. Movie making.
But you can't navigate yet.
Exactly. You can't actually navigate. You can't get turn-by-turn directions to the grocery store until you double tap and zoom in on a country, then a city, then a neighborhood, and finally hit street view.
And Arnold explains that people fail because they wander around aimlessly without ever clicking down to that street view.
There's this amazing anecdote in the book about him observing people at the gym. The ping pong ball gym goer.
Oh, yes. He talks about watching people bounce from the treadmill to a bicep machine to a yoga mat with zero intentionality.
Totally random.
Yeah, they're just bouncing like ping pong balls. He goes up and asks them, "What's your goal?" And they give the most common answer in the world.
To get in shape.
Right.
But getting in shape is a continent on Google Maps.
It is entirely too vague to be actionable. Getting in shape for what? The physiological requirements for different activities are completely opposed to one another.
Like lifting versus running.
Exactly. Are you training for rock climbing? Because if you are, carrying extra muscle mass in your legs is a massive detriment.
Oh, true.
Are you a wrestler who needs explosive, fast-twitch muscle fiber quickness? Or are you a 45-year-old just trying to lower your blood pressure so you have the cardiovascular endurance to chase your young kids around the backyard without having a heart attack?
So the goal changes the workout.
Completely. Once you zoom in on the specific why, the mechanical steps you need to take become crystal clear. The exercises choose themselves once the vision is sharp.
I hear that. But let me play devil's advocate for the listener who is sitting in traffic right now feeling completely burned out. What if they don't even have the continent?
That's a very real problem.
How do you actually find that broad vision if you feel totally fundamentally lost? The book suggests something that sounds almost too simple to work. It says you have to create empty space to let inspiration in.
Put the phone down.
Yeah. Step away from the screens and just exist.
It sounds simple, but in our modern attention economy, it is incredibly difficult. But there is rigorous neurological data backing this up.
Really? Like actual studies?
Yes. When you constantly bombard your brain with inputs, podcasts, social media, emails, your brain is in a state of constant processing. It cannot synthesize.
It's just full.
Right. A famous 2014 Stanford University study looked at this exact phenomenon. They tested people's creative output while sitting at a desk versus walking.
And walking won.
Big time. They proved that the simple act of walking increased creative, divergent thinking in 100% of the participants.
Wait, every single person?
Every single person got more creative when they introduced physical space and movement.
Because it frees up the cognitive load.
Precisely. It activates the brain's default mode network, which is where daydreaming, memory consolidation, and future planning happen. And the book illustrates this beautifully with the story of Jonolina.
That story is absolutely wild. He walked across the Himalayas.
Nearly 1,700 miles solo.
Man, that's intense.
It is. Jonolina was trapped in a suffocating grief after his younger brother died. He was completely lost. So he decided to walk the entire length of the Western Himalayas.
Just to walk it off.
Initially, he thought he was just testing his physical limits, punishing himself almost. But the sheer volume of empty space, the rhythm of walking day after day in the mountains, provided the cognitive clarity he needed.
It gave him the space to think.
Exactly. His brain finally had the bandwidth to process the trauma of his brother's death. And years later, when he felt lost again, trapped in a highly stressful, unfulfilling corporate job in London, what did he do?
He went walking again.
He walked the 500-mile Camino de Santiago in Spain. And by the end of that walk, he had found the courage and the clear vision required to quit that job. He created the physical and mental space for a new vision of his life to snap into focus. You cannot force a vision while staring at a spreadsheet.
That is so true. And Arnold creates his own space every single night. He doesn't walk the Himalayas, though. He sits in his jacuzzi.
Much more comfortable.
Yeah. He says the hot water, the steam, the repetitive hum of the jets, it acts as his sensory deprivation chamber that gives him mental clarity.
And that is actually where one of his most impactful viral moments was born.
Oh, the January 6th video.
Yes. Picture this. It's January 6th, 2021. He's watching the chaos and the riots at the U.S. Capitol on television. He's feeling profound sadness, anger, but he's also looking at it through a unique lens.
He was seeing the rioters' actions as a desperate, misguided cry for help.
Right. So he goes out to the jacuzzi that night to process it, and sitting in that hot water, the vision crystallized. He suddenly saw himself sitting at his desk, holding the sword from his movie Conan the Barbarian.
Which, as a communication strategy, is a highly specific, brilliant vision.
It's incredible imagery.
He used that literal sword as a metaphor for American democracy in what became his viral "A Servant's Heart" speech.
Yeah, he sat at his desk, held the heavy steel up to the camera, and explained the metallurgy of a sword.
I remember that. He talked about how it gets stronger the more it's beaten.
He explained that a sword doesn't get strong by being pampered. It becomes stronger, sharper, and more resilient only after it goes through the agonizingly harsh conditions of being thrown into the fire, pounded with a heavy hammer, plunged into freezing water to cool, and ground against a stone over and over again.
And that all came from just sitting in the water.
Because he had cultivated a daily habit of creating space for his mind to wander in that jacuzzi, he was able to synthesize his 20 years of public service into a direct, visceral message of healing that resonated globally.
Okay, so you've created the space, you've looked at the globe, you've zoomed into the street view, and your vision is crystal clear.
Now comes the hard part.
Right. The next crucial step in this framework is deciding the scale of that vision. And this brings us to a massive pivot in Arnold's life. We have to talk about tool number 2, aiming for the mountaintop.
Never think small.
Let's look at Arnold in 1987. By every conceivable Hollywood metric, he has made it. He is the ultimate action star.
He's huge.
He has killed 283 people on screen. His name, Schwarzenegger, a name he was explicitly told to change because no one could pronounce it, is finally above the movie title in massive block letters.
But he wasn't satisfied with just being the king of action.
No. He wanted to do comedies, he wanted to make Twins with Danny DeVito, and he wanted to make Kindergarten Cop.
And this is where he faced a wall of massive institutional resistance. Journalists laughed at the idea. Studio executives flat out refused.
Even his own people were against it.
His own agents and friends told him it was a terrible, career-ending idea. They told him he was an action guy, he was making millions, why risk it?
Yeah, they thought he would just embarrass himself.
They told him he'd have to take a massive pay cut just to get a studio to greenlight it. But Arnold understood the inherent, invisible danger of aiming for the middle. What's fascinating here is how he views that danger.
What do you mean by the invisible danger of the middle?
Well, he argues that if you only aim for good enough, or if you just settle for the comfortable plateau you've currently reached, you lose the driving motivation required to go all in on the microscopic details that create true greatness.
Because it's not exciting enough.
Exactly. Human beings are energy-conserving machines. If your goal is just to be the regional manager, or in his case, just to be Mr. Austria, you will subconsciously calculate the minimum viable effort required to achieve that.
You won't push yourself.
You will not do the grueling, agonizing work required to perfect the serratus muscles to become Mr. Olympia. The size of the goal dictates the intensity of the effort.
I want to push back on this, though, because here's where it gets really interesting. We are constantly told to manage our expectations. We are told to set realistic goals so we don't get crushed by disappointment.
Society loves a realistic goal.
Right. So isn't aiming for the absolute mountaintop inherently riskier? Or does aiming small actually guarantee failure because you half-ass the effort?
It feels riskier emotionally, yes. But strategically, Arnold argues that aiming small actually guarantees failure because it guarantees you will never tap into your full potential.
You just coast.
You'll never push yourself to the absolute limit of your capabilities. Furthermore, there's a concept in economics and strategy called asymmetric risk.
How does that apply here?
When you aim for the middle, you are entering the most crowded, highly competitive tier of society. Everyone is aiming for the middle, but when you aim for the absolute top, the air is thinner.
Less competition.
The competition is actually less because most people have already talked themselves out of attempting it.
That makes so much sense. If you aim for the middle, you naturally half-ass the effort. because the reward isn't inspiring enough.
Precisely.
It reminds me of the story in the book about James Cameron making Titanic. Cameron didn't just want to make a fun, dramatic shipwreck movie with a good romance plot.
That would be aiming for the middle.
Right. He wanted to make the definitive historical epic. He literally forced the studio to fund an expedition so he could dive in a Russian submersible to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to see the wreckage of the actual Titanic with his own eyes.
And why did he do that? It wasn't just a stunt. He needed the audience to feel the true, overwhelming extravagance of that ship.
He had to feel it himself first.
Exactly. He needed to feel the visceral, terrifying tragedy of going down in the freezing pitch black of the North Atlantic. He needed to absorb the reality of it so that every teacup stamp on the set, every piece of silverware, every extra's period-accurate costume was perfect.
That is just wild.
That level of obsessive, borderline maniacal commitment is required for massive success. And when you operate with that level of obsession, you almost always invite naysayers.
Oh, people will come out of the woodwork to tell you it's impossible.
Constantly. But you must learn to use those naysayers as fuel. You cannot let them validate your insecurities.
The book lists incredible historical examples of this friction, doesn't it?
Oh, some great ones like the founders of Airbnb. They were famously rejected by all 7 major investors they initially pitched.
All 7.
They were told the idea of renting out air mattresses in a stranger's apartment was absurd. Then you have the founders of Netflix who walked into Blockbuster to try and sell their company for $50 million and literally got laughed out of the boardroom.
Bet Blockbuster regrets that now.
Just a bit. And Arthur Jones, the man who invented the Nautilus fitness machines that revolutionized gyms worldwide. He was explicitly told in a rejection letter from medical experts that uniform muscle development across a full range of motion was biologically impossible.
They were told it violated the laws of biology, and yet they did it. Naysayers are basically handing you the negative reinforcement you need to push harder. Arnold is fascinated by this because he grew up with extreme negative reinforcement in Austria. He tells this wild story about Krampus.
Yes, the terrifying alpine folklore demon.
So scary.
In Austria, St. Nicholas brings presents to the good children, but Krampus, this horned demonic creature, comes to punish the bad children, to literally scare them into behaving and conforming.
But for Arnold, that negative reinforcement totally backfired on the adults. It didn't make him want to be good and settle down into a quiet Austrian life.
Not at all.
It terrified him, yes, but it motivated him to get out. It made him want to escape to something bigger, to a place where he was in control.
That defiance is key. Tell someone with that mindset that a goal is impossible, and it triggers a psychological defiance. Tell Arnold he can't transition to comedy, and he'll waive his salary entirely.
Wait, he didn't take a salary for Twins?
He took back-end points instead, and ended up making more money on that one comedy than he did on any of his action movies. Tell him he can't lift something, and he'll bench press 500 pounds just to watch your jaw drop.
It is the exact mindset of Sir Edmund Hillary. The book recounts the legendary story of Hillary becoming the first person in recorded history to summit Mount Everest.
Such a great story.
When he finally made the agonizing descent back down to base camp, the press was waiting. The reporters asked him the obvious question, what was the view like from the top of the world?
Like, you've conquered the ultimate goal, now what?
Exactly. And Hillary replied that while he was standing up there, exhausted and freezing, he looked across the Himalayan range, saw another unclimbed peak in the distance, and immediately started plotting the route he would take to summit that one next.
Fulfilling a massive dream doesn't satiate the hunger for a person operating at this level. It merely provides a higher vantage point to see even further out into what is possible.
But here's the brutal reality check. And this is where the book transitions from dreaming to bleeding. The size of your dream doesn't matter if you aren't willing to endure the physical and mental cost of achieving it.
It's time to pay the toll.
Which leads us directly into the third tool. Work your ass off. Reps, pain, and the 24-hour countdown.
There are no shortcuts. This is the central thesis of his life. Work works. 100% of the time, work works.
Just undeniable effort.
If you look at the sheer volume of his output during his bodybuilding peak, the numbers are frankly staggering. He invented what became known as the double split routine.
Explain the physiology of that, because it sounds like torture.
It borders on it, honestly. Before Arnold, bodybuilders generally worked out for maybe 2 hours a day, full body, a few times a week.
Sounds reasonable.
Arnold realized that to achieve unprecedented size, he needed unprecedented volume. So he split his muscle groups and worked out for 5 hours a day.
5 hours a day.
2.5 hours in the morning, focusing on chest and back. Then he would go to work, go to school, and return to the gym for another 2.5 hours in the evening, focusing on legs or arms.
How many weight is that?
At his absolute peak, analysts calculated he was moving 40,000 pounds of weight per training session.
40,000 pounds. That is the equivalent of lifting a fully loaded commercial semi-truck every single day.
Yes. And it requires a profound, almost religious commitment to the concept of reps, reps, reps.
He tracked everything, didn't he?
When he was just starting in a dingy weightlifting club in Graz, Austria, he would write his entire workout on giant chalkboards on the wall. He would meticulously tally every single set and every single rep of every exercise. He refused to leave the building until that board was completely marked off.
And the brilliance of this is how he translated that physical mechanism to intellectual pursuits.
Right, it wasn't just for the gym.
When he transitioned to Hollywood and struggled with the English language, he applied the exact same methodology to acting. When you just read the script, he would make physical tally marks on the front cover of his movie scripts, tracking how many times he had read them out loud until the dialogue was pure, unconscious muscle memory.
And he did the same thing in politics. He would run through a speech 20 times in his living room before stepping to the podium.
And he embraced the pain of those reps, not in some weird, masochistic way, but as a crucial metric of progress.
It's data.
Exactly. I am immediately reminded of the Muhammad Ali quote in the book. A reporter once asked Muhammad Ali how many sit-ups he does. Ali responded, "I don't know. I only start counting when it starts hurting. When I feel pain, that's when I start counting because that's when it really counts."
That is a profound biological and psychological truth. Before the pain, you are just maintaining your current state. You are just warming up.
It's comfortable.
The pain is the biological indicator that you have reached the threshold of adaptation. The micro tears in the muscle fiber only happen under extreme duress, and that duress signals the central nervous system to rebuild the tissue stronger.
So pain is literally growth.
Arnold has a saying, reps build strength, but pain builds size. You have to push past the comfortable plateau to force growth.
I have to interject here because this is where I struggle, and I know listeners struggle with this hustle culture mentality.
Yeah.
What about burnout?
It's a very valid concern.
We see people today working 80-hour weeks who don't become the governor. They just end up hospitalized with adrenal fatigue. How does Arnold differentiate between productive, necessary reps and just recklessly destroying your own health?
That is a vital distinction. Arnold is not advocating for mindless, chaotic busyness. He is advocating for highly focused, intentional follow-through.
Focus is key.
It is not just about starting the grueling work. It is about finishing it completely and cleanly. He is obsessed with the integrity of the work. He has a very strict rule for himself and his staff.
What's the rule?
You are only allowed to use the phrase, "I took care of it," when the task is 100% finished, not 90%, not "I sent the email, I'm waiting to hear back." Finished.
Wow, that's strict.
He compares it to the gym. He talks about watching a guy doing 4 sloppy half reps on a pull-down machine, swinging his back, using momentum instead of muscle.
You've all seen that guy.
Arnold argues that the person who does sloppy half reps in the gym is the exact same person who sloppily changes a baby's diaper or forgets a crucial detail on a financial report at work.
How you do the small things is how you do everything.
Exactly. The burnout usually comes from the anxiety of incomplete tasks piling up, not from the physical execution of focused work.
How you do the small things is how you do everything. It makes me think of a video game completionist.
Oh, the people who have to get every item.
Yeah, you know, that player who refuses to advance to the final boss level until they have meticulously unlocked every single hidden achievement, found every coin, and beaten every obscure side quest.
They don't just want to beat the game quickly.
Right, they want to master the environment entirely. But to do that in real life, you have to manage your time ruthlessly. Which brings us to Arnold's 24-hour countdown math. Because this completely destroys the universal excuse of, "I'm just too busy to chase my vision."
The math he lays out is wonderfully ruthless because it is universally applicable.
Let's walk the listener through it.
Okay, let's do the breakdown. Every single human being has the exact same 24 hours. Let's assume you sleep 8 hours a night, which is ideal for cognitive and physical health. You are left with 16 hours.
Okay, 16 left.
Let's say you work a demanding standard 8-hour shift. Now you have 8 hours left. Even if you factor in 2 hours for a brutal commute and eating your meals, you still have 6 hours left in your day.
Every single day.
Every single day. 6 hours of unallocated capital. Arnold used those extra hours in the 1970s with terrifying efficiency.
He was a machine even back then.
While training 5 hours a day for Mr. Olympia, he also built brick walls to earn cash, ran a mail-order fitness booklet business to build his brand, took college classes to learn business English, and took acting lessons to prepare for Hollywood.
So what does this actually mean for the listener? It means if you are spending 4 hours a night scrolling on your phone, binge-watching reality TV, or getting into arguments on social media, you are actively, consciously choosing to ignore your vision.
You are burning your capital.
Exactly. But here is the trap. You can lock yourself in a gym for 5 hours a day. You can master your time, move semi-trucks worth of weight, and build the most incredible physique or the most incredible app or the best novel. But if you do it all in the dark, you're just a strong guy in a basement.
Nobody will know.
You have to get the world to care. You can do all the reps in the dark, but eventually you have to show the world what you've built.
And that transition is where so many talented people fail. They believe the work should speak for itself.
It never does.
Arnold learned very early on that the work never speaks for itself. You have to control the narrative.
Which brings us to the fourth tool of his philosophy: sell, sell, sell.
When Arnold arrived in America in 1968, we have to understand the context. Bodybuilding was not the massive multi-billion-dollar mainstream fitness industry it is today.
Not at all.
It was a deeply misunderstood, fringe, almost taboo subculture. When mainstream sports reporters did bother to cover it, they used highly derogatory words. They called the athletes freaks and muscle-bound.
There was a lot of stigma.
There was a pervasive assumption that the competitors were violently narcissistic or deeply insecure or just plain stupid. Arnold recognized a fundamental ironclad law of public relations.
If you don't speak, they will.
Exactly. If you do not speak to the press and proactively sell your own story, the press will gladly fill that void with their own negativity and stereotypes.
He realized they had to educate the public. The older guys at the gym, his mentors, they wanted to hide from the journalists. They hated the media.
But Arnold stepped right up to the cameras.
And he learned a massive, game-changing lesson about sales from his mentor, Joe Weider's marketing brilliance. Weider didn't run around pleading with people, saying, "Bodybuilding will be a huge sport one day, please take us seriously."
He changed the tense.
He spoke entirely in the present tense. He would sit down with international politicians and say, with total conviction, bodybuilding is nation-building. It is a global phenomenon.
The psychology of speaking about your vision in the present tense does two incredible things. First, internally, it forces you to work intensely hard right now to make that bold statement true so you don't look like a delusional liar.
It holds your feet to the fire.
Second, externally, it acts as a magnet. Human beings are drawn to confidence. People want to join a movement that feels like an inevitability, like it has already achieved massive momentum.
It's infectious.
Joe Weider sold the vision of a sprawling fitness empire, and he recognized that Arnold was the perfect, charismatic frontman to execute that vision.
Arnold leaned into being the front man hard. He hired a publicist, which was unheard of for a bodybuilder. He went on the dating game.
That clip is hilarious.
He went on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and taught Carson how to pose. He participated in the iconic documentary Pumping Iron, which completely humanized the athletes. He single-handedly reframed this bizarre fringe activity into a mainstream art form.
It was a masterclass in PR.
But I have to pose a question to the listener, through you as the expert.
Yeah.
So, what does this all mean for the listener? How do you sell yourself without feeling like a phony? How do you aggressively sell your business without feeling like a sleazy car salesman?
It's a great question because the line between self-promotion and arrogance is thin. The key is how you handle resistance and hostility. Selling isn't just about smiling for the cameras when things are going well. It's about maintaining control when you are under attack.
How did Arnold do that?
Arnold mastered a communication tactic called bridging, which he learned from political strategist Jim Lorimer.
Bridging. Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
Bridging is essentially conversational judo. When someone asks you a hostile trapping question, for example, during his gubernatorial run, reporters constantly question how a Hollywood actor who played a cyborg could possibly have the intellectual capacity to run California.
The sixth largest economy in the world.
Exactly. If Arnold got defensive and started listing his qualifications, he would look weak. Instead, you use bridging. You accept the premise of the question to establish immediate common ground and disarm the questioner's amygdala, and then you immediately pivot to the topic you want to discuss.
Give me an example of what he'd say.
He would say, "That's a great question about my acting background, and it's totally fair to ask, but you know what a better question is. A better question is why the career politicians who have been running this state for 20 years have bankrupted our schools."
Oh, that's so smooth.
It allows you to take total control of the narrative without appearing evasive or defensive.
And it's brilliant. You redirect their momentum. But the book makes a really poignant point here. Selling yourself honestly requires embracing all parts of your story, especially the failures. You can't just spin everything.
Authenticity is key.
Let's look at the 2005 special election in California. This was a disaster. Arnold pushed 4 major policy ideas directly to the voters, trying to bypass the stubborn state legislature, and he got absolutely crushed at the ballot box.
It was a wipeout.
Every single initiative failed. It was a devastating, highly public humiliation. Most politicians in that scenario would hide in their office, issue a sterile written statement through a press secretary, and blame the opposing party for misleading the voters.
Instead, Arnold called a live press conference the very next morning. He stood alone before the hostile media, and he admitted he was wrong.
Just flat out admitted it.
He said, "I rushed it. I didn't listen to the people. This is on me." He owned the failure completely. If he had hidden, the media would have written devastating headlines for weeks. Governor terminated, the end of the action hero.
By stepping up and owning the mud he was standing in, he maintained his authenticity.
Yes. He proved to the voters that he wasn't a typical, phony Teflon politician who refuses to take accountability.
And that requires an incredible ability to adapt. To successfully shift gears and learn from those explosions, you have to keep your ego in check. Which leads us to the next core concept. Tool number 5, shifting gears. We have to dive into the philosophy of amor fati and reframing failure.
Amor fati is a profoundly powerful Stoic concept, originally introduced by philosophers like Epictetus and later heavily echoed by Friedrich Nietzsche.
What does it mean exactly?
It translates from Latin to love of fate. Notice the wording. It does not mean you merely tolerate or bear what is necessary and unpleasant in life. It means you actively, aggressively love it.
Love the pain.
You love it because you recognize that the hardship is exactly the friction you need to grow. Arnold applies this Stoic lens directly to his very harsh upbringing in Thal, Austria.
And it was harsh. We're talking no running water, fetching water from a well in the freezing winter, chopping wood. His father made him do push-ups and knee bends just to earn the right to eat breakfast.
It was essentially a boot camp.
And his father was strict, demanding, and sometimes physically abusive.
It is an intense environment that would break many people, or at least leave them with deep resentments. But Arnold, using the principle of amor fati, chose to view that drudgery, that pain, and that strictness not as trauma to be wallowed in, but as the exact customized training program he needed to survive the world and eventually escape Austria.
And he used it.
He says he was made for it, and ultimately he was made by it. He reframed the trauma into a tool, and Arnold connects this ancient philosophy directly to a massive critique of our modern culture.
The epidemic of complaining.
Yes, complaining is everywhere.
It's the default mode of communication on the internet.
Because complaining is easy, and it is entirely passive. But Arnold points out that complaining steals precious time from your 24 hours. When you complain about a situation, you are literally giving away your agency to that situation.
You're wasting your capital.
You are cementing a neural pathway of learned helplessness.
Right.
You must train your brain to reframe failure not as a personal defeat, not as an indictment of your worth, but simply as a crucial data point.
A data point. I love the examples the book uses for this. Look at the creation of WD-40. The lubricant spray everyone has in their garage.
The name is so literal.
It literally stands for water displacement, 40th formula. The chemist trying to invent it failed 39 separate times. But he didn't view those as defeats. He learned from each chemical failure, tweaked the variables, and nailed it on the 40th try.
Thomas Edison is another great example.
Right. Edison famously went through 9,000 failed prototypes trying to invent a functional battery. When a reporter asked him how it felt to fail 9,000 times and have no results, Edison reframed it brilliantly.
What did he say?
He said, "I have gotten a lot of results. I know several thousand things that won't work. Failure is simply a signal pointing you away from a dead end."
It's exactly like a scientist in a laboratory.
Oh, I was thinking about this while reading. If a scientist mixes 2 chemicals in a beaker, and it explodes, blowing up the lab. The scientist doesn't sit on the floor and cry that they are a bad
Oh,
person.
just data.
The explosion isn't a disaster. It's just a wildly dramatic test result, telling you absolutely not to mix those two specific chemicals ever again. You document the explosion in your notebook, sweep up the broken glass, and set up the next experiment.
But to operate with that level of detachment, you have to reject the status quo.
Yeah.
In Arnold's house, they have explicitly banned a specific phrase from being spoken. He calls them the 7 dirty words.
It's how things have always been done.
Clinging to the comfort of how things have always been done is a total guarantee of mediocrity.
So true.
When Arnold became governor, the political lifers in Sacramento couldn't understand why he wouldn't just play the legislative game the traditional way. They kept telling him, this is how we do it here.
And he ignored them.
He recognized that the old way wasn't working for the actual people of California. It was only working for the politicians. He was willing to break the established rules, to veto massive bills, to call special elections because his personal risk tolerance was incredibly high.
He wasn't afraid to fail.
He constantly anchored himself by asking one question: what do I actually have to lose?
Right. Let's examine his downside. If he took a massive swing at acting and totally failed, what was his worst-case scenario? He was still a 7-time Mr. Olympia, considered the greatest bodybuilder ever.
A pretty good backup plan.
If he failed at politics, if they laughed him out of Sacramento, what was his worst-case scenario? He was still a globally famous, wildly wealthy movie star with a beautiful family.
When you do the preparatory work to build a foundation and minimize your downside, taking massive, terrifying swings becomes much less terrifying.
But to successfully shift gears when you hit a roadblock and learn from those explosions, you have to keep your ego in check and your ears open. Which leads us to the next vital tool, number 6. Shut your mouth, open your mind.
The world is a classroom.
I really resonated with this section. It introduces a pivotal, unsung figure in Arnold's life, Freddie Gerstle.
Freddie was a huge influence.
Freddie was the father of Arnold's childhood friend, Carl. While Arnold's own father thought bodybuilding was a selfish, ridiculous waste of time and wanted him to be a police officer, Freddie saw the potential in this driven kid.
Freddie taught Arnold a crucial lesson, that training the mind is just as vital as training the body.
He introduced him to so much.
He introduced Arnold to history, philosophy, and politics. He taught him to be a sponge, soaking up the complexities of the world by being intensely, quietly curious. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Freddie taught him that the world itself is the ultimate classroom.
And the book explicitly calls out a major societal flaw we have today regarding that.
Yes. We live in a society that aggressively pushes every single high school student toward a traditional 4-year university, often saddling them with crippling debt, under the assumption that a desk and a lecture hall are the only valid places to acquire knowledge.
It's a huge problem.
But Arnold points out that the trays, the plumbers, the electricians, the independent gym owners, the artists, these people build brilliant, highly successful, intellectually rich lives using the real world as their laboratory.
Arnold explicitly states that the dirty, sweaty weightlifting gym in Graz was his high school, his college, and his graduate school all rolled into one.
He learned project planning, long-term goal setting, anatomy, and cross-cultural communication in the space between the squat rack and the bench press.
Let me push back on this a bit, though. We live in an era where everyone wants to be the loudest voice in the room. Social media literally monetizes our ability to broadcast our opinions constantly. How does the listener practice active curiosity in a noisy world?
By understanding the strategic advantage of silence, to be a true student of the world, you must master the art of listening. The book quotes the Dalai Lama on this exact point.
What's a quote?
He said, "When you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new." Ernest Hemingway said he learned nothing when he was speaking. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg echoed the exact same sentiment regarding her time on the Supreme Court.
Listen twice as much as you speak.
The biological reality is simple. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You must use them in that exact mathematical ratio.
The ultimate historic example of this principle in Arnold's life is the famous Terminator lunch.
Such a great Hollywood story.
Arnold meets the young, relatively unknown director James Cameron at a restaurant. Going into this lunch, Arnold and his powerful agents were absolutely convinced he should play the hero of the movie, Kyle Reese.
Because heroes get the spotlight.
Arnold wanted to be the leading man. He didn't want to play a villain with barely any lines. But during the lunch, instead of pitching himself and dominating the conversation, Arnold shut his mouth and listened.
He just absorbed it.
He just listened as Cameron passionately laid out his brilliant, incredibly specific, terrifying vision for the villain, the cyborg machine. Because Arnold kept his massive ego in check, because he absorbed Cameron's vision instead of fighting it, he realized the villain was the star of the movie.
He accepted the role of the Terminator, and it totally changed cinematic history.
But gathering that knowledge is only half the equation. Once you absorb that knowledge, you must apply it.
Arnold has a rule: use it or lose it. Knowledge, much like muscle tissue, literally atrophies if it is not put into rigorous practice. You can't just read books and feel smart. You have to deploy the ideas.
He proved that when he was fitness czar.
Arnold details his time serving as the chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness under George H.W. Bush in the early 1990s. He didn't just sit in Washington and issue memos. He physically traveled to all 50 states at his own expense.
That's dedication.
He didn't just stand on stages and give speeches to adoring crowds. He acted as a sponge. He sat in folding chairs in school gymnasiums with local, underfunded physical education teachers and health professionals.
Just listening to them.
He listened to them to understand the actual grassroots problems surrounding the rise in childhood obesity and the catastrophic cutting of school fitness programs.
Which perfectly transitions us to the climax of this philosophy. The ultimate application of all this gathered knowledge, strength, and influence is not to serve yourself, but to serve others.
Tool number 7.
Yes, the final and undoubtedly the most profound lesson in the book: break your mirrors.
In this section, Arnold vehemently, angrily rejects a title that is constantly thrust upon him. He refuses to accept the title of self-made man.
But if anyone is self-made, isn't it the immigrant who came with nothing and conquered 3 industries?
That is the myth he is trying to shatter. He insists that the self-made man is an arrogant illusion.
Because no one does it alone.
He argues that absolutely everything he achieved, every bodybuilding title, every multi-million-dollar movie role, every political victory, was the direct result of the help of others. The parents who fed him, the mentors like Freddie Gerstle and Joe Weider who guided him,
The training partners
who spotted his heavy lifts, the directors who framed the shots, the makeup artists who worked at 4 a.m., and the literal millions of ordinary people who spent their hard-earned money to vote for him or buy tickets to his movies.
It's a huge network.
Because we are all, every single one of us, the product of the help of others, we have a profound, unbreakable moral duty to give back.
It totally dismantles the typical self-help book mentality that dominates the bestseller list today. So many of those books push a highly selfish, cutthroat, zero-sum game. Like, for me to win and get rich, you must lose.
It's all about crushing the competition.
But Arnold's actual life proves the opposite. He trained every single day with his direct rivals. When he needed to improve his muscle definition, he didn't hide his workouts.
He invited them over.
He brought his fiercest competitor, Frank Zane, to live with him in California so they could learn from each other. He trained daily with Franco Columbu. Pushing his rivals made them better, which in turn forced him to train harder to beat them, which ultimately elevated the popularity and the financial viability of the entire sport of bodybuilding.
Rising tides lift all boats.
Exactly. The title of this final chapter, Break Your Mirrors, actually comes from a deeply moving commencement speech.
Given at Yale University in 1994 by Sergeant Shriver,
Arnold's father-in-law.
yes, and the founder of the Peace Corps, Shriver told the graduating elite of Yale to literally shatter the glass of their own self-absorption. He warned them that if they only look at themselves in the mirror, they will never be happy.
True contentment is outward.
When you break the mirror, and you start looking through the glass at your neighbors, at your community, at the people suffering around you, that is when you find true, lasting psychological contentment. A life dedicated solely to personal ambition, accumulating cars, and staring at your own reflection ultimately leaves you hollow and terrified of losing what you've hoarded.
And the book makes a crucial point here. You don't need millions of dollars or a political office to give back. You don't need to build a hospital to be useful.
No, giving back is accessible to everyone.
The book shares the story of the brilliant author David Sedaris, who spends hours every week walking the rural English countryside near his home, doing nothing but picking up litter just to keep his community clean.
And Todd Olin's story is so moving.
It really is. Todd Olin, a homeless man living on the streets of Los Angeles, who spent years meticulously cleaning the sidewalks of his neighborhood every single day with nothing but a cheap plastic trash picker and a shopping cart.
He didn't have a home, but he still found a way to be profoundly useful to his environment.
Arnold talks about how giving back actually becomes an addiction.
It triggers a dopamine response far more powerful than any personal achievement. He describes his experience in the late 1970s, traveling to Wisconsin to teach basic powerlifting techniques to teenagers with intellectual disabilities for the newly formed Special Olympics.
He loved doing that.
He talks about watching a young man violently struggle to lift a weight, refusing to give up despite the physical difficulty, and finally locking the lift out. The explosion of pure joy and triumph in that room was intoxicating for Arnold.
It changed him.
It fundamentally shifted his perspective away from his own biceps and his own bank account and set him on the path that would eventually lead him to public service as governor.
It makes me think of the myth of the self-made man like an astronaut. Imagine an astronaut returning from a successful mission to the moon. They step out of the capsule, walk up to a podium, and boldly claim to the world that they went to space all by themselves.
A self-made astronaut.
It's absurd. It completely ignores the thousands of aerospace engineers at NASA who built the rocket, the mathematicians who calculated the orbital trajectory, the factory workers who meticulously sewed the seams of the spacesuit so they wouldn't freeze to death.
The astronaut is just the person sitting at the tip of the spear.
We are all, in our own lives, riding on rockets built by the labor, love, and sacrifice of other people.
That is a perfect analogy, and it brings us to a final provocative thought that I want to leave with the listener today. In the conclusion of the book, Arnold points back to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius,
The Stoic philosopher.
in his famous timeless journal, Meditations, which is considered the ultimate text of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius opens the book in a very surprising way. He doesn't open with his own grand philosophies or military conquests.
How does he open it?
He opens with a simple, extensive, deeply humble list, thanking every single person who ever helped him, fed him, or taught him a painful lesson. If you, listening to this right now, were to write your own Marcus Aurelius style list today, who would be on it?
That's a powerful question.
Who are the teachers, the tough bosses, the friends who supported you when you were in the mud? And perhaps more importantly, looking at how you are living your life right now, whose list are you currently on because of the selfless, unprompted help you've provided to them?
Okay, let's get right to the challenge. I am challenging you, the listener, to take these 7 tools, having a clear, zoomed-in vision, aiming for the absolute mountaintop, working your ass off with painful reps, boldly selling your story, shifting gears and reframing your failures, staying fiercely curious and quiet, and breaking your mirrors to give back.
Don't just listen. Apply them.
Actively use these tools to enhance your life. Don't just listen to this and move on to the next thing. Start applying them today.
And we want you to actively participate tonight. Don't wait for tomorrow. Sit down at your kitchen table with a physical piece of paper and write out your 24-hour countdown.
Do the math.
Subtract your 8 hours of sleep. Subtract your hours of work and commuting. Look hard at that remaining time. Identify exactly where your precious, unrecoverable, wasted hours are going and aggressively reclaim them for your vision.
We'd love for you to engage with the author, Arnold Schwarzenegger, on social media. Tell him how you are putting his specific tools to work in your own life. And please, go purchase this book, Be Useful, by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's an essential read.
Supporting the author allows you to keep these vital lessons close at hand, physically sitting on your shelf, ready for the next time you inevitably face a roadblock or find yourself face down in the mud.
It truly is a profound, battle-tested blueprint for moving from a place of feeling overwhelmed and lost to a place of absolute, unshakable purpose.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us and listening. We warmly invite you to follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast with anyone in your life who needs a blueprint for a useful life. Remember that image we started with from 2011, a man face down in the mud, everything broken. No matter how deep the hole you find yourself in, the tools to climb out are right there in front of you. You just have to pick them up and do the reps. We'll see you next time.